this episode of Purposely Curious, we sit down and discuss end-of-life care. We all one day will meet the same fate, but if you had to choose where to die, where would you choose to do so? Have you or your loved ones planned for your end of life? Join us as we discuss a complex subject that makes us all human. This episode starts now. Hello, Mr. Leone.
Greetings, Mary. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well, thanks.
That's good.
How about yourself? How's everything in your world?
I'm doing good. I'm drinking lots of water right now. I'm just trying to drink a lot more water, be healthier, take my prenatal vitamins and my extra vitamins. Now, prenatal, I take it because I used to shed a lot of hair growing up.
Oh, no way.
And the doctor said take prenatal vitamins, and I guess it has like higher levels of biotin and vitamin B, and so that's why I'm taking prenatal vitamins. But I'm trying to drink a little bit more water this weekend. So, how about yourself?
That's good. Are you a big water drinker?
I am a big water drinker. As a fact, I drink too much water, I've been told.
Really?
Yes. So because I would drink like 7-8 water bottles a day. My blood pressure is usually really low.
Yeah.
And so is my salt intake because I guess the more water we drink, the more we urinate out. And so we put out more sodium, which is salt.
Right.
And so that's why my blood pressure is really low. So I was told that I have too low salt levels. So yes, I drink a little bit too much water, but in the last few days I've been drinking a little less. So I was like, this weekend I'm going to go back to my normal drinkage. But yes.
That's a good problem to have. I'm the same way, actually. I'll drink like 8 to 10 bottles of water a day, and because I just love it so much. I'm not a big like soda drinker, or I don't drink coffee at all, so it's one of those things where my only drink of choice is water.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're allergic to coffee. By the way, everyone, he's allergic to coffee. How? I don't know, but I love coffee.
So think about...
I almost killed him once, guys.
Yes, she did. She poured me a drink that had like loaded with caffeine. And I was just like, oh, this is pretty good. And the next day I was like, fuck, I'm dying.
Yeah, it was a coffee porter, I think.
Yeah.
And I didn't think, I like stouts, coffee porters. So I thought I would treat us to a drink, I guess, of my choice, but I didn't think, he's allergic to caffeine.
Right.
when I bought it. So I'm sorry.
It's a good lesson for me, a little reminder, that's like, hey, you got to stay away from that stuff. But here's the thing, though. Think about those moments in your day where you're like, oh, my God, I'm dying. I need coffee. And then I want you to stop for a second and think of me who cannot have coffee.
So in those days, what do you think? Oh, my God, I need what?
I don't. That's the thing. It's like, I don't. There's nothing. I'm so used to not doing anything. There's people that just panic, because they're like, I need a Diet Coke, or I need a Snickers candy bar. And it's like, no, I don't need any of it. I'm just so used to not having it. But I will say this, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock p.m., when is usually the time I'd have meetings with my boss, he's wired on coffee like 5 minutes before the meeting,
Yeah.
And he's like throwing out all these like suggestions, ideas, and questions. And that's when my brain shut off, It's like my brain's been working from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and I can't do 2 + 2 right now. So I don't know what you're saying, but I'll figure it out tomorrow.
Yeah, that's when normal people have coffee, when they feel like that.
I can't do it. It sucks, man. It's like, and it's funny because he's caught me a few times. He's been like, hey, so you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just, pretty dumb right now because I just can't focus. It's just too late,
Yeah.
But
well, there you go, everyone. Someone's allergic to coffee.
Life sucks.
So I want to talk about the Dating Chronicles. I have a friend named Angel who basically said, I feel your friend Leone on the dating podcast.
Wow.
He's being shocked about people in dating apps. He said it's wild as fuck out there.
Yeah. Is Angel a guy or a girl? Do you know?
Oh, guy.
Yeah, it's
He's the
interesting.
guy.
Yeah, see, I told you, right? I mean, he confirms that it's pretty wild out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's like so much for, hey, let's just try to, meet and talk. And it's like, nope, swipe right,
Oh, so funny. So I also had another friend, we'll call him the Geek Pin, who basically kind of broke down the last episode as far as our cocktails. He said he had a Seinfeld when you mentioned it, like a Seinfeld moment.
Right.
He was drinking a green tea ginger ale. He has a friend who drinks adios motherfucker, he said.
There you
He's
go.
new to drinking.
Perfect match for you.
He's new to drinking, and his friend is new to drinking and drinks whatever the cool kids do, which I guess is adios, and that's because he's new to drinking. That must mean he must be really young. So he's looking to save a buck and get messed up quick, right? He did say, yes, you can tell a lot about a person by what they drink. He said that I look like a wine drinker. So I'm more of a Prosecco drinker, which is a form of a wine, I guess.
Right.
But I guess he was trying to see what type of drinker I was. But I thought that was funny.
That's pretty funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always amused by people that say, "Yeah, I could tell a lot by this and that." And I'm like, "Well, that's cool," because it's like,
Yeah.
I can't, because I told you my friends do goofy things, and I'm just like, "What are you doing? Why is your drink pink?" It's like, and I know it means something, except they're just being idiots. I mean, but yeah, I'm sure there's a whole like, guy's guide to picking up girls type thing. There's a whole chapter in there into what, what if a girl buys this drink, and what does it mean? I'm sure there's a whole like thesis on that,
Yeah. So I know you saw my post where I quoted you from a quote that you got from someone else,
Yeah.
where you said for a guy, sex is like pizza, even when it's really, really bad, it's still pretty good.
Yeah.
I got a lot of responses on that.
Oh, no way, really?
Yeah, Simon said, to a certain extent, in general, it's true. However, there have been situations where he's pretended to finish if he was bored or whatever. So he's sure he's not the only guy who's done that. Girls aren't the only ones who do that.
No, I'm
Have
sure.
you ever done that?
No,
No, come on.
no, because for me, it's impossible. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, unless you got put in a situation and you just really don't like the girl, but you're doing it because of some reason, which is just weird to begin with, then I could see that happening. But no, come on. If you're in that situation and you're having fun, you're there for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's no way. It's like it's gonna suck, maybe, and maybe it's not good, but it's gonna be pretty damn good for a guy, for me.
Yeah. So your quote, I guess, touched a lot of guys. And actually, someone said it was from a certain movie.
Oh, I wonder which one.
Oh Lord, I wish I had written that down. But apparently they saw the quote and they were like, it's from so and so movie, and I should have written it down. Damn it,
I
I'm
wish
so
it
upset
did.
with
Yeah, I
myself.
wish it did. Because I'm curious if I saw that movie. Because I want to say it might have been a comedian who said that. I'm not sure, or a movie director
Yeah.
or somebody. I don't recall seeing it in a movie, but I could be wrong.
Excuse me, I was drinking some water. But yes, so I thought that was pretty interesting. So people are still talking about our dating chronicles, and also they had a lot to say about that quote about the pizza.
That's
and
funny.
It sucks.
That's funny, but it's true though. I'm sorry that it's true, but it's like for guys, for the most part, it's pretty true.
Yeah, how funny. So, this episode, I kind of wanted to change the subject and we wanted to talk about end of life care. End of life care has several meanings to several people. It's basically when we are reaching the end of our lives. Everyone's journey is different. Some people may be diagnosed with a terminal, disease, where our life is coming to an end in our younger years, and a lot of us, eventually, basically all of us, are going to get there towards the end.
Right.
So we're going to discuss what palliation of symptoms means, the misconceptions of hospice care. We're going to discuss cultural differences as far as how death is seemed. And then towards the end, I just kind of want to go over some of the weird experiences that are out of this world that I myself have had.
Nice.
And then I know you said your dad was in hospice care.
Yes.
So I thought it would be interesting to have a nurse talk about it from her end who practices hospice, and then you on the receiving end. So basically, hospice was started kind of in the 80s because it was seen that there was a certain type of care that was needed. You know, you have ER nurses, ICU nurses, pediatric nurses.
Right.
And so our registered nurses saw a need for people who would specialize in end of life care and caring for those who are in their end of days. I think a lot of us have a misconception that what we see in Hollywood and the movies is that we're going to die. We're going to say our last words for the most part, right? And take 2-3 breaths and be done with it, and it's not painful. But that is not the case for 98% of us. As we age, just like a car, our bodies start to malfunction, whether if it's our heart or our kidneys, our bowels. I mean, you name it. The way I explain it to my patients' relatives is that the human body is like a car, and so like a car, there are things and organs that we can kind of switch out and everything, and there's medications, to get the oil running. But eventually, there's not much you can do to keep it going.
Right.
And so that's where we come into our end of days. And that comes for all of us. We're all going to die eventually. And so it's definitely something that a lot of people, don't want to talk about in the United States. In other cultures, it is something that is accepted, that it's celebrated. But for some reason, there's a form of denial in our country. And there is also, you and I being Hispanic, of Hispanic descent, we have I guess you can say for the Mexican culture, I don't know if it's for the Salvadorian culture, but they have the Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead, which is November 1st.
Right.
But I can tell you from my experience as a Hispanic nurse taking care of Hispanic patients, that's not the case. They seem to be the most difficult cases I have had. There's a big sense of denial, and I know that's a cultural thing.
Right.
But I don't know if you have anything to say before I continue ranting here.
It's interesting, what hospice is, because when it was introduced to me, I was, pretty young in my 20s, and I was making those decisions. I had pretty much power of attorney over my dad's health. He was very, very sick, and at that point, he had gone multiple, surgeries and issues and, issues, regarding, he had heart problems, he had cancer, and then he had like a mild stroke once, so ultimately it's one of those things where, the doctor says, well, there's nothing we can do for him anymore, and all we're going to do from now on is just, keep him comfortable. And those are the words that, you're like, well, what does that mean, And basically it meant like, you don't have to bring him into the hospital anymore. He's a DNR patient.
What does that mean for those who don't know?
Do not resuscitate. So, and that was already predetermined because we knew that any day something could happen and he could end up intubated or life support or something. And then, it's like, we don't want that, because he was very old already. He was
How old?
80. I mean, ultimately at the time of his death, he was 84. But, before that, he was sick for many years. And when they tell you those words, just make him, we're going to make him comfortable. You're like, what does that mean? Like, it's kind of confusing because the doctors don't want to spell it out for you, except they start to, they start to hand you pamphlets and they're like, we're gonna be in touch with this person, that person. They're gonna set everything up, whatever, you know. And then it's like, okay, what is this? And then they're like, oh hi, we're hospice, and I'm like, what's hospice, And when you put two and two together, you're like, oh, okay, people, a team of people in hospice, and typically it's nurses and doctors and volunteers and people that come help and clean and take care of patient and bathe and all that stuff, and assistants, so there's a whole team of them, at least in my experiences, and
Mm-hmm.
they are there to help you, not just you but the family, to answer any questions, to help out, but at the same time, they're there to help you transition into what's to come, and what's to come inevitably is death.
Mm-hmm.
And death is never easy to talk about. In my experiences, it's very unusual for me because I've had so many deaths that's in my family and people close to me that it's tragic to me, but I don't feel hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't feel devastated by it because I think I've seen it so many times in my life that you become desensitized in a way. But I like to also say, you get kind of used to it, and that's because both sides of my family are huge, Mexican one side, Italian on the other, huge families, right? So there's always a wedding, there's always a party, always, and there's always a funeral, always. That's just the way it goes. A lot of people in your family, a lot of death, but
Right.
it's, you can only be so lucky if you hear about these things, and it's like, well, your aunt was 90 years old, grandma was 96, and it's like, well, they lived a long life. It's sad and devastating when it's a baby or somebody young. That's a whole different story. But in terms of hospice, it was just something I wasn't ready for. I was in my 20s and had to make these decisions, and I'm like, it was frustrating at first. It was like, like I wasn't ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Your dad and mom never talked about what they wanted if they started to age and started to have problems and maybe would not make it.
Yeah, we all talked about that. We're like, hey, if something should ever happen to us or whatever, like we don't want to be hooked up on life support. In fact, because death is so common, my parents already had bought their their grave sites, many
Mm-hmm.
years ago when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
because they said, hey, if anything should happen, it's already paid for, and all, if anything should happen to any one of us, so at least we have a resting place, and it's already paid for, because obviously those things every year go up in price, and not only that, but cemeteries are limited to space, so we had reserved our spaces back in the 80s, so we already have those spaces, and
Right.
so it's those conversations when you're young, they're pretty dark. Like, you don't want to discuss those kind of things, But I think as an adult, and having gone through so many, family death, deaths in the family, that it's just one of those things where it's a reality, and you're like, yeah, it's good to plan, So there's a good number of people in my family that have planned for that kind of stuff, But but yeah, they both decided that it's like, don't keep us alive, That's not what we want.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. Like, as an adult myself now, I look back and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be a vegetable hooked up to a machine, giving somebody a false hope that I'm going to recover or come back or, whatever. It's like, no, look, if my organs shut down and I can't breathe on my own, just disconnect me, game over.
Game over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that I know in our culture, a lot of people, like your family and other families, discuss openly. They plan for it because they know that eventually we are going to meet that,
Right.
that crossroads where our life is going to end. But there's also a big amount of people that don't want to talk about it, don't want to plan for it, because if they plan for it, it's almost like they're calling death. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so there's so many issues that hospice nurses and social workers and chaplains deal with. There are cultures that embrace death as a natural part of, our life cycle. And there are those who, for some reason, just don't want to accept it. A lot of times people believe that, like I said, in the movies, we're going to take our last few breaths and be fine prior to that and then die. But that's not the case.
Right.
So there's a book that we give to families called Gone From My Sight by Barbara Carnes, which was
Yes.
published in 1986. It's this blue book.
Yes.
And so I'm going to read a description. The biggest fear of watching someone die is a fear of the unknown, not knowing what dying will be like or when death will actually occur. This booklet, Gone From My Sight, explains in a simple, gentle, yet direct manner the process of dying from disease. Dying from disease is not like it's portrayed in the movies, yet movies, not life, have become our role models. Death from disease is not happenstance. It doesn't just occur. There is a process. People die in stages of months, weeks, days, and hours. Gone From My Sight is a literature used to reduce fear and uncertainty to neutralize the fear associated with dying. It is designed to help people understand dying, their own and someone else's. Now, this book is not very long, and you said yes when I mentioned it, like you received it yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, I got a story to tell you about that.
Yes, please share.
So that was given to me by one of the hospital nurses. And by the way, my dad's hospice nurse, I still see her every like couple weeks here, and there. She was a retired Air Force, major, and then she became a hospice nurse, So she's a badass woman. She's up there, I don't know, she's probably hitting 70 years old now or so. But she goes out there and hikes these crazy mountains and stuff, But yeah, she's super nice, and I always see her. But yeah, she's the one who handed me the pamphlet. It's like a little booklet. And, the way she approached me was, I want you to read this, but when you're ready, like, don't, when you're in the mood to read more about this, to take a look at this. It's really important. Mary, I gotta say, that's one of those things, like, in life that you read, and I have those holy shit moments,
Mm-hmm.
Because
I hear that a lot.
that
Yeah.
book details how someone is going to pass away.
Yes.
And I'm like, but how do you know that? Like, that's impossible. How do you know that? I'm speaking to the author. I know it's a nurse who wrote that booklet, right?
Yeah. So the reason she wrote that is because she saw that we all have typically, right? Let's just say 95% of us have the exact same death.
Yes.
And when we're born, think of it as a wheel of life, right?
Right.
Some people say the moment we're born, we start to die.
Right.
I know it's horrid, like Debbie Downer type of way to look at it.
Yeah.
But if we die of old age, the things that we see is very typical. What I can tell you from my perspective is that in this book it says people die in stages of months, weeks, days, and hours. I think it's years, months, and I'm adding years.
Yeah.
Years, months, weeks, days, and hours.
Yep.
Every single person that I've given this book to, they have said, we've been dealing with dad or mom with these stages for a year or so,
Right.
or 2 years. It's just the process that our bodies will go through, no matter what.
Right.
Regardless, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, if we die of old age, we're gonna go through this. If we die of cancer, we're gonna go through
Yeah.
this. So for some of us, it's gonna be quicker. For others, it's gonna take longer. But the symptoms are the same.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
so
not
weird.
us dying in our, yes, some people die in their sleep.
Right.
It's a very small percentage, whether they have a cardiac arrest and they die in their sleep and they don't wake up. But most of us are kind of gradually deteriorating.
Yep.
And so this book was written from experience, and the nurse felt that there was a need to write this down. Something that nurses before her, doctors before her had seen decades before. She just was smart enough, Miss Barbara Carnes, to put it in a short book that anyone can read. And so a lot of families, when we give it, tell us the exact same thing, is that we've been seeing mom and dad going through this. They're eating less. They're sleeping more. They seem a little confused here and there. it's just our body aging. And the best way I explain it to my families is that, it's just like any car. Eventually, car just starts deteriorating from rust, from oil, like depletion,
Right.
there's now the makers don't make the parts, so we can't change it, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so our goal is to palliate those symptoms, whether it's pain, constipation, respiratory distress at home, because we know that there's nothing more that the hospitals can do for them. It's not to say that there aren't people that still feel the need to send their loved ones to the hospital, but that's where hospice came in, as far as in the United States, was to say, there's not much the hospitals can do for your loved one. We're going to palliate them, manage their symptoms at home,
Right.
wherever their home is, whether it's their home or a facility, right, or hospital.
Right.
And so your dad had these services at home, and so that allowed your dad to spend his last days at home.
Yeah, here's the thing, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you before in conversation, but he was in hospice for 3 years.
Wow, that's a really long time.
That's a really long time, because he would go through these issues where it's like, well, he might not make it tonight, through the night, right? And then that's when the doctors are like, well, there's nothing we could do. We're going to put him on hospice. They didn't realize that he was going to bounce back, in 4 days,
It's very typical.
So
Yeah.
he was on hospice for a long time. So for 3 years, we had round the clock nurses, volunteers, cleaning people, doctors come checking, social work, everybody coming in around the clock, all the time, for something, and the thing is, my dad was a fighter, so his big thing, he was a big Laker fan, so he's always watching Lakers games, always. Now we fast forward to when he started to show signs of what you read in that pamphlet, in the booklet, Gone from My Sight. I mean, it was word for word, because in there they start describing, 6 months before or a year before, changes in like loss of interest in things that they love, right? And like my dad would not miss a Laker game. And then all of a sudden, I put the game on for him, and then I wake him up and tell him, hey, the Laker game was on. And he would tell me like, it's okay, you can turn it off. I don't want to watch it, And I
Yeah,
thought,
he was just tired.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, that's weird. Like, he doesn't miss a game ever, but that was already signs, of what the booklet is describing, because later it
It's
mentions,
describing it as withdrawal.
Yeah.
Withdrawal from normal activities.
right. And it's also, later describing things like changes in diet, like they no longer want to eat meat or drink coffee or drink, whatever. Like they become more picky and less, but
Yeah.
but it's so weird that happens months before, the
Yeah.
your end date, pretty much,
And
So
the reason they don't want to eat meat is because their body can't handle it. Our esophagus is a muscle that we don't realize when we eat, right? We're chewing.
right,
We're chewing the food, and then when we swallow, our brain is telling our throat, our esophagus, to swallow
right,
and bring it down. We do it naturally without even thinking, because that's how our brain is wired.
right,
And so as we age, our brain reacts slower. And so they're chewing, and just that chewing alone, because their heart is tired, their heart is old, chewing alone takes it out on them physically. And then you start to chew, it becomes harder because the muscles, the esophagus is a muscle,
right,
isn't reacting as quickly, right? And the brain isn't telling it quickly to swallow. And so that's what we call dysphagia. So we have a hole in our throat. If you guys touch kind of like where your clavicle is, that hole right there is the glottis, and that closes naturally when we swallow. And again, remember, the esophagus is a muscle, so the brain is slower, so then it's telling our throat in a slower pace to close that glottis. And so that's where you see a lot of choking in the elderly, because it's not closing fast enough. And so that glottis is the doorway to our lungs. And so that's where you hear the coughing and the choking when they're eating. And so what happens as we get older is that we, one, eat less, and then we need our food kind of pureed, or chopped really finely for us to even, we can't have burgers like we used to.
Right.
And so a lot of people eventually, meat is like, we have to chew it for a really long time. And so people can't handle that anymore. So you do see a lot less meat consumption towards the end. I know it's going into the physiology of how the body works and how it starts to, give up on us as we age. And so that's why he was having a hard time eating meat and those things. Another thing, coffee makes our heart palpitate because it's caffeine, right?
Right.
And so people kind of want less of that as well. That's something that we do see with our patients. And so it's kind of unfortunate because, their body is asking for less. And so we as hospice nurses are taught that their body will only ask for what they actually need. You and I might eat 3 meals a day, but as we get older, we're not going to have full 3 meals a day. We're going to have bites here and there. We might have 12 little tiny meals, which can consist of 2 spoonfuls of whatever we want, right?
Right.
And so that's another thing that I notice is that families have a hard time because they're trying to feed them full meals. And as we age, and I'm sure you can tell, all of us kind of start losing weight as we hit like 70 years and so on.
Right.
Because we're just eating less. Our body needs less to survive. So yes, that's one of the things that we see. It sounds like you and your family were kind of on board when the doctors told you.
To start the process of hospice?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just something you don't want to hear because there's so many unknowns, right? There's uncertainty. There's nobody to explain it to you. The doctor's telling you kindly, there's nothing else we could do. So your days are numbered, So that's when hospice takes over and they start to explain the whole process. And they say, well, there's a whole team and we're here to help you and we're here to answer anything. And that was very comforting because that's what I wanted. I wanted answers and that's where I got my answers. And so I was grateful for that. And, they explained everything along the way and they were always here. And if I called them in the middle of the night, they were always here within, 15, 20 minutes. Because it turned out that my dad's nurse lived in my same neighborhood, like 2 minutes away, So, we're very grateful for that. They were all very kind, very hardworking, very patient, so, but honestly, it took me a while to get used to the process because I'm feeling all this pain, anxiety myself, right? Because the inevitable is coming, right? Death is coming. But these people, I felt for a while, they were in the way. They were like, why are you always here? Why is there somebody always here? Because, you want your quiet time to just sit and relax and all that. Then I realized that it was good that they were always here because it kept my mind off of, my thoughts going into deep, darker places,
Yeah.
I had to always be alert. The door had to always be open. Somebody's always delivering medication or setting up something or somebody's coming over. So, so there was always a process. And then I realized it was good to see them because they were all good people and they all had a role to play. And all I had to do was just, listen to them and interact with them. And once this was all said and done, even to this day, I'm truly grateful for every one of them, because it's like everything they did truly did help. And I felt so much better. The process was so much easier. And they answered things that a doctor did not want to, and,
or didn't know how.
Yeah, I mean, they know how, but, it's just one of those things where, they don't want to tell you in a cold waiting room in the hospital what's going to happen. They'd rather say, hospice will tell you, and I'm totally okay with that because hearing that in the comfort of my own home was key to accepting what was going to come. Reading that book, that Gone from My Sight book was key to understanding what was going to happen up to the very last minute of his life. And I'll tell you, it played out exactly how it's described in that book. I don't want to mention it, but it played out exactly like that. And that's what shocked me.
Yeah. So you had 3 years of hospice.
Yes.
Now that alone in itself is a blessing. So a lot of people might not feel the exact same way as you did.
Right.
And I want to touch on that, is that your case is very rare. And the fact that you said your dad was on for as long as he was.
Yes.
Sometimes we have patients who are going in and out of the hospital. I mean, the doctors and nurses probably know they don't have that much time left.
Right.
But whether it's the doctor's choice or the family's choice, sometimes they get referred to our services too late. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Where maybe the doctors knew a year ago they should probably be on hospice, and so they refer them to us when they're a week away from death, 2 weeks away from death, and then we get the bad rap that we came in the picture and they died because we came in the picture.
Right.
And so you're kind of a positive story to what hospice care is, because you got to see it in the long run, the benefits of it.
Right.
You know, you and I are both Hispanic, and so there's a big misconception that hospice is bad in our culture.
Right.
And it's almost like when they bring hospice, that means mom's gonna die, you know, grandma's gonna die.
But see, that's what I thought too, you know?
Yes. And it doesn't necessarily mean the case, but
Right.
for a big number of people, that is the case, because doctors wait to the end, whether it's because it's the family's denial, or sometimes, let's be real, doctors keep the patients alive as long as they can get money out of them. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to put it out there,
Yeah.
and then refer to them when there's not much more they can get out of them. That's the fact of the American system, and that's
Right.
just the fact.
Right.
I can tell you that sometimes we'll get referrals, literally they're on their deathbed, hours away from death, and
Yeah.
we'll get a referral. So then the families are like, oh, well, hospice came in and they were dead in 4 hours. And it's not the case. Ideally, we want to get doctors to refer to hospice beforehand.
Right.
And so there are good parts, like experiences like you had, and then there are people who swear to God hospice is like the devil. And it's
Yeah.
not the case, whether it's because someone had a bad experience or because they were referred really late. I can tell you that when I first started hospice, I had a patient who was 115 years of age.
Jesus.
And
Wow.
we do get those patients, and the family was in denial that their loved one was dying. 115
Because they
years
live
old.
4 lifetimes? I mean, come on.
But
115.
this is what we deal with. So they didn't see the fact that their loved one was 115. They said hospice came in and now our loved one is dead. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Wow.
So we deal with a lot of, and so the story they're always going to say is that great grandma was 115, hospice came and ended her life. And that's not the case.
No.
Sometimes there is denial that gives us bad rep. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, anybody living past 100 today is considered extremely lucky.
Anybody living past 80
Well,
is
yeah.
considered
Yeah.
extremely lucky.
I mean, in 20 years from now, of course, 115 might be the normal, or 50 years from now, whatever. But today, I mean, come on, 115, that's like 3 lifetimes,
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to get at, is that there's a sense of denial. And we do get that where
Right.
we get a bad rep. I've had patients who will die, on our service, and not once do they get pain medication.
Wow.
They never had morphine. You know what I mean? And that's another thing we get, is that,
Right.
oh my God, we're just here to morphine push. I can only speak for my company, my cases. I don't push it unless they absolutely need it.
Right.
And that's where referring someone to hospice care early is very important, because then I can tell them, if your loved one were to have respiratory distress, pain that is out of control, and nothing else works, we would use this medication.
Right.
And if they don't need it, we won't touch it. So by the time that comes, I've already explained the blue book, gone from my site, so they are already prepared. But if you get a referral really late and they're on death's door, it's hard to come as a new person and try to explain these things to their loved ones, right? So you were very blessed to have that experience of having the amount of time that you did to be able to get to know the process.
Yeah.
And so I have seen very beautiful deaths where the family discussed death, since, our patients, right? Our patients discuss death with their their adult children when they were kids. They explain to them, this is what I want. This is, I've paid for this. I've paid for that. I've paid for that. So it's like no big deal when it
Right.
comes. Not that they're not upset that their parent is gone. They were just taught that this is a normal life. And then we do have those cases, like I told you, 115-year-old grandmothers dying and people are fighting over to keep them alive, or, complete denial.
Right.
And so that those are the harder cases. And so it can be very mentally draining.
Yeah, I bet.
It Yeah. So I thought it would be a really good conversation to have, and not so much about hospice, but just and our end of life. We're all going to get there.
Right.
Some of us might be, sooner than others, but eventually we're all going to die. And so if I were to choose, where do I want to die? I can speak for myself. I want to die at home. Wherever my home is, I want to die in my bed.
Right.
And that's something that hospice can provide you. Some people that I have met said, yeah, I want to die in a hospital. Bless them. That's their
Right.
choice.
Right. Right.
But if you were to choose, ask yourself, if I were to choose, if I knew I was dying and I were to choose, where would I want to die? Would you want to die at home with your loved ones or in the hospital?
Yeah. I mean,
Now think of what's happening now with
Yeah.
COVID-19, right?
yeah.
People are dying alone because they won't let their loved ones in.
That's the hardest part about this. That's the saddest part about this is those people that are passing away because of how infectious this disease is, this virus is. These people are passing away alone, and that's truly sad. And in most cases, the loved ones don't get to see the body anymore. Maybe
No.
maybe the body moves on to be cremated because there's no funeral home, or places to store the body, so they have to cremate them, right? So it's like that's the last. There's no last moment with them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the last moment was the day before they went to the hospital, and it's like it's so sad. But that's how crazy the times are right now with this virus.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell you from our experiences with it, is that yes, our patients are actively dying. They're dying, some of them are in the process, some are a little later.
Right.
But what we've seen is that when they have been exposed in the 2-week marker, let's say we realize they've been exposed for A or B reason, whether it's in the nursing home and other people are infected, their incubation period is like 2 weeks. And then the moment they start to have symptoms, they're gone in 2 days. But again, these are high risk patients who are already on hospice because their bodies are already shutting down. And so that's kind of like the tough end of it on our end. Now, the experience of someone dealing with a COVID patient with a younger patient who is in the hospital in the ICU, they might have different experiences, but I'm just talking for our demographics.
Right.
Is that if they're, exposed 2 weeks, it takes about 2 weeks, and then in the moment they have symptoms, in 48 hours they're gone. And so, I'm not trying to touch too much into that, but the goal of hospice or palliation of symptoms is to make sure that those who choose to die and not go to the hospital for A or B reason, right, because they're ready to go, they want to have hospice services. Sometimes people get on our services, but they're not emotionally ready. The goal is for us as a team, social worker, chaplain, a nurse, is to get them to acceptance. That's not always the case, and that is their right. And so sometimes people say, well, they're on hospice care, right?
Right.
The doctors, everyone's like, there's not much we can do, but if the families want to send them to the hospital, that's their choice. It's not my right to stop them. I tell them, if this is your loved one, and if you want to send them to the hospital, go ahead. Just know that you would then have to come off of our services. And so sometimes people aren't ready. They just don't want to talk about it because of the fear of losing their loved one, right?
Right.
Those are hard conversations for me to have with families when sometimes we have families who are fighting. Let's say grandma's 100 years old, mom is 100 years old, and they want a tube feeding, they want this. We're not there to talk them out of it. We're just there to say, who are you doing this for? For
Right.
yourself? Are you doing this for yourself or for your mom?
Yeah.
Is this something your mom wanted? And sometimes mom told them, I don't want that. Or sometimes the conversation was never had,
Right.
And so I been doing hospice for 13, 14, 15 years probably, and it's my calling and educating, and every nurse is different.
Right.
So for me, who am I to stop you? But my goal is to educate you and give you the information so that you make the right decision for you and your loved one. And so mentally, it's really draining, but I know that even though sometimes we get a bad rap from certain people, whether the referral was really late or because they had horrible staff, I can't speak for everyone. 98 or 99% of people appreciate our services, and they'll say, everything you told me was happening. Everything you told me was going to happen happened. My loved one was comfortable. And so when we talk about palliation, it's almost like the nurse comes to the home, right?
Right.
You say, my dad is feeling this, my dad has this, then the nurse and the doctor talk, and everything is taken care of in the home. It's not like you have to take him to the doctor, get the x-ray, get the medication. Everything is done in the home by the nurse, and the medications are sent home, and so the loved one doesn't have to go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we mean by palliation. And so now the government is seeing that there is a benefit to palliative care for those who aren't ready for hospice, right? But symptoms can be managed at home, and so that's something that Medicare and insurance companies are trying to figure out right now.
Right.
But it's definitely something that is in the works. And so I know all of us want to live forever. We think we're going to be young forever, but the reality is that we're not. And so culturally, there's certain cultures that embrace it more and talk about it more. And so I've had cultures where their loved one dies, and then yes, they are sad, right? But they're having a buffet.
Right.
They're enjoying having good laughs. And then there are other cultures that, it's like very dramatic, and it's a cultural thing.
Right.
And I think it just depends on the cultures and how we are raised. I have seen some crazy stuff that could be described as paranormal by some, and it could be discussed scientifically by others as being lack of oxygen from our bodies.
Right. Right.
So I don't know if you experienced anything that was weird when your loved one was on hospice.
I have one thing. Okay. Now, mind you that this was my dad on hospice. Having some good days, some bad days, right? And he one day mentioned, where, he asked me one day, where did that woman go? And I'm like, what woman? He says, the woman in white. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, a woman in white walked into my room and then walked into the bathroom, which is inside the bedroom, right? And then she walked down the hall and left. And I'm like, no, nobody's been here. And then he never commented again about it, right? So okay, he's, I don't know, he saw something, right? I don't know, maybe medication or something. I don't know. Now, okay, different story. My grandmother, 96 years old, okay, she was healthy up until her last day, literally healthy until her last day. She cooked on her last day of her life, okay? After cooking, she cooked for 100 people, not even joking. After cooking, she called my cousin who lived nearby and said, take me to the hospital. I don't feel good. And my grandmother never asked to be taken to the hospital, She was good about her health. She would go, on her visits and all that. And she lived a long life, 96, with virtually no health issues. She just took one or two pills. She had a minor heart condition that, she had. And I remember she was taking nitroglycerin pills for that, but that's it, So for her to say, take me to the hospital, that's a big deal, right? So my cousin took her to the hospital, and they said, well, it's her heart and there's nothing we can do, and we can just make her comfortable. So they transferred her into a convalescent hospital And within 5 hours, she passed away. Mind you, she crawled into her own hospital bed by herself. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
like, she didn't. She was still walking. You know, so it's like she knew she got to live a long life, and she got to know that at the last moment that this is it. These are my last final hours. So there was no disease, no long time, anything. She literally cooked 6 hours before she passed away.
Yeah.
Now, the crazy thing about that was 2 weeks before this happened, okay? I was sitting down with her at her house. There was a bunch of us who were watching a soccer game on TV, and she saw somebody walking through the door and walk across us, the living room, into the bedroom. And when it was like, people were moving around, it was like, time to go home, whatever. And my grandma said, she looked at me and she goes, "Where did she go?" And she's telling me in Spanish. And I'm like, "Who?" And she said, "The lady in white." And I'm like, "What?" And she says, "Yeah." She's like, "The lady in white that walked in the door, that walked right past us and walked into the bedroom." And I'm like, "Oh, what?" I'm like, mind you, my grandma was very sharp. Okay, no mental problems at all, no brain. Like, she knew everybody's name, she knew everything. So I was a little like, weirded out by that, but didn't think much of it. Later, when I heard that my dad tell the same thing, I was like, what is the connection? Why are these people seeing a lady in white?
Yeah.
Is that something you've heard before?
Not so much a lady in white, but there are things that I see very often. And a lot of now again, going back, I've been doing it for 13, 14 years. Towards the end, they do start to have hallucinations,
Oh, right.
that we see very common. A lot of times sometimes it's I would say a big chunk of people is they start to say, "I saw so and so."
Right.
My initial reaction is to ask their family member, "Who is so and so?" And I already know they're going to say that's so and so who died 20 years ago. It's
Huh.
very common, very common. And so that's when I start to tell them, okay, they're seeing people from the past. Um, Again, some people think it's the lack of oxygen, the body kind of misfiring, right?
Right.
Others believe it's their body's getting ready to go. Their mental, the portal is opening. And so 99% of the time when they see someone, I ask their loved one, "Who is so and so?" I already kind of know they're going to say it's someone who died, right? And
Right.
99% of the time they're like, "So and so died." Um, I have a weird experience that I will never ever forget. I went to see this patient who was on service maybe 10 years ago, and she had congestive heart failure. So, what congestive heart failure means is that the heart is enlarged and it's not pumping like it should. Our
Right.
heart is a muscle. So, when our heart is working overtime, just like our legs get big on leg days, our heart can get big when it's working too much. And
Right.
so, because our heart is so big, it can't pump properly. And so, it is a chronic disease that gets worse over time. And so, her feet were super swollen, super, super swollen. And she was no longer eating. She wasn't very alert, but she would wake up here and there to tell her loved ones. And so I came and I stood at the bed on the left side of the bed to try to take her vital signs, her blood pressure, temperature, and so on. And she hadn't talked to their loved ones for like 2 days. And she told me no, with her eyes closed, move, move to the other side. And I was like, what is she talking about? You know what I mean? She kept telling me to move. So I moved to the other side because it was causing her distress. And she was fine when I was on the right side of the bed. It's like she saw somebody on her left side that I was messing with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that night, and I told her loved ones, it seems like she didn't want me standing there because somebody was there and I was in the way. And her agitation decreased when I moved to the right side. And her loved ones were like, "Yeah, that's so weird, right?" And I explained to her, like, she might be seeing something, whether you believe in the
Yes.
spiritual world
Yeah.
or, if you're religious or if you don't,
Right.
she might have just been hallucinating. And so the next day I came back again because she wasn't eating. She was in the process of actively dying. They were, remember I told you she had really swollen feet?
Right.
They said that that night she was like, Mom, Mom. And this is a lady who's in her 90s. That in the middle of the night she was like, Mom, I can't get up. My feet are too heavy. My feet are too heavy.
Wow.
And they were like, she's ready to go. She's ready to go, but her legs won't let her. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think 2 days after that, she was gone. But that just goes to show her that her body, she was ready to go to Mom, but her body wasn't, it was still kind of keeping her here. I have had patients who have cancer, for example, who emotionally are ready to go. They're just like, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
This is too painful.
Right.
And so at the time, you know, California now has different laws with assisted kind of medication, you know, but at the time there wasn't. And this patient was like, I want to move to a state that will allow me to, you know, whatever. And I said, it's not legal here, and you have to be a resident of that state for a minimum of 3 years.
Right.
And you don't have to be years, you know. And I explained to him, I said, but all I can tell you, and he lived with his family, so the medications were with his family and everything. I said, but if you're ready to go, if you just are ready to go emotionally, things will happen a lot faster.
Yeah.
And not even, I'm not kidding you, in less than 2 days he was gone. But he was fine prior to that. And then we have patients who are actively dying in the process, but they're waiting for their loved one who's 2 weeks out. And I've seen those people not eat for 2 weeks, and the moment their loved one arrives, they're gone in an hour.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
But
I've seen a lot.
It just shows you though that the will to live is so powerful. Mm-hmm. See, because that's for 3 years. That's what my dad had. My dad did not know defeat. Okay, now mind you that my dad came from. My dad was part. He was old. He was part of the greatest generation. So my dad was 17 and a half in World War II. He was in Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked. He was in Korea War. He was in the Vietnam War. He survived all these years. You know, grew into old age, and he was strong-minded. He was a strong-minded military guy. You know, so even though he was on hospice, he was out of bed typing for 12 hours a day, you know, the story of his life. And then he was watching Laker games. And then some days he'd get sick and not get out of bed. Some days he just couldn't, you know, but it was that will to live. In his mind, he did not know defeat. So it wasn't until like the last week and a half of his life where he had like a final heart attack that just rendered him unconscious, you know? And by doing so, he didn't have a choice at that point. But one interesting thing, though, because you mentioned it, is that about 1 day, 2 days before he passed away, he came out of he was on morphine, you know. I was administering the liquid morphine sublingually, you know, and just to help him, you know, rest, you know, and he came out of it one day. And I think that might be documented in the book. I'm not sure that it's not, you know,
it's not a surge of energy.
Yeah, exactly. He came out of it and he started having a conversation, and then he was saying how beautiful it is, and I think he was talking to my grandma. Honestly, it sounded like he was talking to my grandmother, his mother, who had passed away in 1982. Okay, I think he was having a conversation about her or with her. Because when he came out of it, he was fully alert, but he was saying things like, you know, it's so beautiful. Like, you know, like some things did not make sense, but he was coherent because remember, he was unconscious before that, you know? So
it's a surge of energy. Yeah.
And that just was shocking to us because we're like, whoa, is he coming back? Like, you know, and of course he wasn't, but it's just not something we expected, you know?
Yeah. But that's in the book. Yeah.
Yes, you know, and so it's one of those things where it's like he was having a conversation with somebody, and we put it together, and it was, you know, we 100% think it's my grandmother, you know, and it's like, is this the medication causing these neurons to fire and create these hallucination or memories, you know, or conversations, or is there something spiritual, abnormal, that, you know, some experience where he's connecting he has that one foot in the other realm, the other side, one foot in this world, and he's able to see something of what's coming or where he's going.
Mm-hmm.
So that really fascinated me because it's like I saw that firsthand and it was scary at the moment, but then I realized, I mean, I don't know what people believe in, I mean, I'm religious, I believe in God, so it's like, I think he was getting a taste of where he was going.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I tell families is sometimes families will read the book and then they'll say, is this there's a surge of energy? And I say, it's up to what your beliefs are. It can be the surge of energy, right?
Right.
And so I don't necessarily say religious because I meet people from all sorts of, I just say spiritual,
Right. Right.
Um, but I can tell you some experiences that I've had. One recently, I've only cried for two patients, one who recently died, and it was the most beautiful death I have ever seen. He said that he was having symptoms that were kind of out of control. He had a lot of respiratory issues. And he said, I had a dream last night that two angels came to me and told me that my wife was waiting for me. His wife was also our patient who had passed away already.
Oh, wow.
And he basically was like, I'm ready to go. Like, this is it. So I called his family. I said, he's having symptoms. He said he had this dream. He's ready to go. And I'm not sure, based on what I'm seeing, what's going to happen once this kind of starts to, once we get the ball rolling. His family came over, and I spent a few hours there because, I wasn't going to leave him without his family there.
Right.
And he was basically telling his grandkids, like, play this music video for me, play this LP for me. And he told them, I had this dream and I'm ready to go. He was gone in 24 hours.
Wow.
And I cried for him because he was one of the sweetest souls I have ever met. Another thing, so what I'm getting at is that he was accepting of his death. He knew that it was coming, and he told his family, do this, do that for me, because he wanted to it be the most beautiful 24 hours of his life. And that to me was the most beautiful death I had ever experienced. That's not from a loved one of mine, right?
Wow.
I cried for another patient who had a hemorrhagic stroke, and she used to crochet. She couldn't crochet after hemorrhagic stroke. And so, because ideally when we get this referral, we don't know how long they're going to be with us for a while, but once we get the hang and kind of get the feeling of where they're at, I kept starting to talk to her and I kept saying, our brain is like a muscle. So let's take our time, let's be patient. We're going to rework and train your hands to start writing, train your hands to start crocheting. Fast forward to 6 months later, she was crocheting like beanies and giving it to organizations for free. And she crocheted a beanie for my future child. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and that was the sweetest thing. And so, the fact that I had made her mentally accept that it takes time, we're going to retrain the brain, right? And I got her to writing and crocheting, was like, I built this bond with her. So she was in the process of making a baby blanket for me, so that for my future child, when she had her last hemorrhagic stroke, which basically took her out. When her family told me that she was in the process of crocheting this blanket for my future child, and that she looked up, because some people say you get like this feeling, and she said, something's wrong, I think I'm having another stroke. And then she went unconscious. I started bawling when their family told me. Like, I started crying hysterically. She died 2 days later. So those are the two patients that I have had connections with. I've had connections with every single patient, but for some reason, these two people touched my heart in a way that I just started crying. And then there was a third patient who, for those who were talking about hospice, sometimes people come onto our services who doctors feel that they may not be with us in this world 6 months from now, but they do really well and they bounce back. So we discharge them because they're just no longer actively dying or terminally ill.
Right.
So we discharged this patient who, when we discharged them, they invited us and the social worker to come over and they cooked for us. And I had a dream. Remember, I had talked about the fact that I have vivid dreams sometimes?
Yeah.
This was probably 4 or 5 years after we discharged her. She came into my dream.
No way.
And she told me it was a pleasure meeting me. And so I woke up and I was like, that's so fucking weird. I haven't seen her in 5 years, right? I called the company. I had friends that still work there, and I said, did you ever get this patient back? And they were like, yeah, she died yesterday.
Oh,
the
wow.
day that I had that dream of her
wow.
is the day that she died. And I was like, okay. So I am a believer in the spiritual world.
Right.
I could probably tell you a million more stories, but those are at least the 3 that really touched my heart. And so it's pretty crazy.
That's crazy.
This is my calling. I can tell you, end of life care is my calling. And we're here for those, I know, even though I deal with this day in and day out, if it's going to be my mom, my dad, my grandma, my brother, I'm going to be a fucking mess. And I do this for a living.
Yeah, but it's not easy,
No,
it's not easy. And you can look at any, paramedic, doctor, firefighter, who can save lives out there, right? And, take a bullet for somebody else or whatever, or help somebody and save their life, a kid from drowning or whatever. But then it comes to their own family, their own kid, they can't deal with it. They can't do it. And I think that's just human nature. That's normal,
Yeah.
It's like, we can't be superhuman in every case because in your sense, it's your occupation and you're able to distance yourself from who's who, it's a patient. Yes, I care for them. But it's a job that I do, but then now if something tragic were to happen to somebody you loved close to you, it's not easy. Like no matter how you plan for it, train for it, how many times you've seen it, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not. So I definitely hope that this episode has opened people's minds to the conversation of the fact that when we're born, we're gonna live good lives and meet good people and be good people, but eventually we all end up in the same place. And so what do we want? If we know we have limited time, do we want to be comfortable? Like just have those conversations openly. What it is, just think about, even if you don't want to have those conversations, think about if you had to choose, if you knew your time was coming, how would you want to go about it so that you're able to speak to your family about that, even if it's 20 years down the line. It's just having those conversations so that everyone's on the same page, because they're, in the end, we all want to make sure that we want to do what's best for our loved ones, right?
Right.
But maybe because we didn't have the conversation, we didn't necessarily tell our kids what we want. And so kid A might want one thing, kid B might want another, kid C might want another. And so if you openly talk about this with your kids and normalize it, it might be easier for them in accepting when you're 120. I don't know if anyone's ever made it that long, but
right.
Yeah.
It's so important to, accept your loved one's wishes. So, it's important to have those conversations. So it's, it's not easy to have those because we're young and we're healthy in the moment, but anything can happen anytime. And it's just, you got to know what they want. And it's so important to respect what they want, because it's like, there's nothing worse than having siblings fight, over, we should do this and I'm going to do this. And it's like, no, you should do what they wanted, what they wish,
Yeah.
And secondly, hospice is something that is difficult to discuss, difficult to embrace, but I've had a great experience with them and I'm truly grateful for what they did for us, what they did for me. And they were truly a remarkable, great team of people who cared, even more much so than anybody at any hospital. And that's only because it's they come to your residence and it's very hyper focused on that one patient, and not only
it's
them,
a specialization.
Yeah, but
you're specializing in end of life care, and
they
we're almost like therapists.
They also, exactly. That's exactly it. They also look at the family and and they ask the family, how are you guys doing? What can we do for you? So I'm very grateful for that. And it's not easy to bring up and discuss, but I will say that it is important to do so if you know anybody who, is, coming, potentially close to a situation like that. And, and also I want to say to you, Mary, thank you for your service, for what you do, because it's a whole different field of healthcare that you're in, you're making these patients, transition into the afterlife and, so much easier. And it's not, it's not easy. It's not easy, and I know that after the fact, the people involved, the siblings, the parents, or whoever, will be very grateful for what you have done for them. And, to you as a nurse, I say thank you, because I know what you do, and it's very admirable. And I know it's hard work for you, and especially during these times where there's a crazy virus, going around rampantly. But it's important work that few do, and I'm grateful that you're doing it and that I know you, and thank you.
No, thank you. I'm going to get all emotional now. But it's funny that you say that, and I'm not trying to make this episode any longer, but my grandmother is in her mid-80s, and she has an advance directive where she has said that if she cannot eat naturally, she wants to be let go. And she's married, right?
Right.
Has a husband, and she put me as the main and in her durable power of attorney. She literally told me in front of my aunt and my uncle and my mom, you will respect my wishes. And my mom was like, you better believe I'm not, if the doctor were to say, I'm going to put her on a machine, I'm going to ask him to put her on a machine. So she looked at me and she's like, you as the nurse who deals with this, I'm putting you as the first in line. My mom is second and her husband is third.
That's
and
funny.
She basically was like, you're going to let me go naturally.
Yeah.
And I felt bad. I was looking at her kids, including my mom, and I was like, oh, shit.
Right.
But my grandmother's not one to be in denial. She's like, I know where I'm going. I'm going up to heaven. At least that's what she believes. And yeah. Anyways, I hope that this episode was interesting for those out there, and then those who have had bad experiences with hospice. I do hope that you don't assume that all hospice experiences are that way. Just, I think it's good to talk about it openly, and hope that our experience, if we had to choose, if we knew our time was limited, let's be proactive. And I know it's a horrible subject to talk about. I know I'm afraid of it myself, but it's one of the weirdest things that I've chosen as a career, but it is what it is. And I hope this episode was, and also Leonie's experience was, something worth listening to today. So anyway, next week we're going to do a whole nother subject that I think is not going to be such Debbie Downer, but thank you for joining us if you made it this long, and I appreciate you listening. So see you next week, Leonie.
See you next week, Mary.
Hey, all right. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
That was episode 10 of the Purposely Curious podcast. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow us on social media at Purposely Curious on Instagram and at Purposely C Pod on Twitter. That's Purposely, the letter C, Pod. Until next time, you know what to do.